is with great joy I present to you, class, the unlock guide for the best character in the entire game, Jar Jar Binks himself. This is going to be a rather long video because I want to be as comprehensive as possible. But fret not, if you are here looking for something really specific, like tier 5 that you just can't beat for some reason, do check the description below for timestamps because we're going to be breaking this into several parts. Not only are we going to be looking at the actual gameplay, but I want to take a moment to actually look at what the Gungans do, why that's important, and how it is going to be affecting the event, as well as our usual looking at what the right mods are, what relic levels you should be aiming for, and even what the Zeta priority for the whole team should be. So without further ado, it's Gungan time. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. But yes, before we actually get into the actual footage of where everything is happening and the strategies that go beyond that, I do want to talk about the modding, the Zetas, and the Relic Priority for the 4 Gungans that you are required to gear up to be able to do the event. And as the title implies, and you'll see later in the footage, I did this entire event with Relic 5 Gungans across the board. So if that's all you have, don't be afraid. You can get it to work with the right modding and strategies that we'll be going over. With that being said, if you do have extra relics laying aside just because you want to power up Gungans even more, or because you want the event to be easier, or because you want to get more out of the raid, the relic priority that you should focus on for the event should start with Captain Tarmals and Boubadir. One of the kind of things you're going to figure out once you get into the event is that Phalanx and Boss Nass really will not die until the shield generator goes down, meaning you typically have a lot of time to be able to get through the events. The issue becomes when Captain Tarpals, and I know this from experience, and Boubadir do not have the offensive capabilities to get anywhere. They can't kill anything because their offense is too low because they're only at Relic 5, and a lot of the juicier stats for damage are only going to come once they start to get Relic 6, 7, and 8. So if we focus on the 2 of them first, we should be done with the missions before the shield generator even goes down, and we don't necessarily have to worry about the survivability of Phalanx. Now again, if you do have a ton of relics, and you've already gotten Captain Tarpals with Boubadir to say R7, which is where you wanted them for the raid, then yes, of course, move to Phalanx. More relics on him won't hurt. Probably won't do much for his damage, but the extra survivability on top of that is nice. Boss Nass, I mean, I guess you can give him extra relics, again, if you're going to eventually do the raid, but at the same time, in all of my runs, he was never the linchpin that died and suddenly things were over. He just naturally has more survivability than the rest of his Gungan allies. Now, that is overall relic priority. Again, it can be done with 5, but if you're going to enhance them, that is the order to do it in. Now, Zetas is actually going to be the exact opposite of that. For Boss Nass, he actually has the most important Zetas on the Gungan team, sans Jar Jar, and of course is going to start with his leadership that provides an immense amount of survivability, not going into too many details there. His unique also does quite a bit for damage because he deals true damage based off of his debuffs, so that's also important. So those are the top 2 that you want the most. After that is definitely going to be Phalanx. If you don't have Phalanx as Zeta, you're not going to be able to have the auto taunt, and that is rather important because that means the only way that you're going to be able to taunt outside of that is by the special that has a cooldown of 4. So it is going to make a lot of these fights very difficult because they're going to go right for the shield generator. You really need to have those 3 if you want this to function well. Honestly, if you only have 2 Zetas, period, you probably do Phalanx before you do Boss Nass's unique. Just, again, for people who are in a very, very tight situation here, I know the event is limited, so you might not have everything ready day 1 and ready to go. Next up is going to be Captain Tarpals. It's pretty good. It allows him to ignore taunt, dispel debuffs on himself. It is very nice, but most of the time you're going to find that you actually want to be dispelling the taunt with Captain Tarpals, meaning that he would be targeting them in the first place with his basic ability. And last and definitely least is going to be Gungan Boubadir. The reason for this is very simple. His Zeta makes it so that Gungan attackers, when they defeat an enemy, they can't be revived. That's great. That's actually awesome for PvP, but for the actual event itself, you don't really need to be perma-killing anyone at any time, so it just becomes entirely fluff. So, again, apply it at some point, but you do not need it for the event. So now that we have the overall relics and Zeta priorities covered, I do want to take another step and look at the overall modding. After that, we will continue on to the tips, and then, yes, eventually we do have gameplay footage, despite the fact that the event literally just opened. So when it comes to overall modding, Boss Nass, the name of the game is speed and protection. You can throw some extra potency on him if you so please, but at the same time, Boss Nass's potency is stupid high for a character that I personally don't have any potency on him. Again, I did this event at R5, so do not be afraid of the current stats you see in front of you. They do not have to be this high. Even with my Boss Nass with these exact same mods at R5 was enough to be able to survive everything that was coming at us. We did place a speed arrow on him, but we we did successfully put protection on his triangle, his cross, as well as his circle. These primaries are all set in place, and then just gave him obnoxious amounts of speed. I would heavily recommend God modding each and every one of these characters for the event, especially if you are doing this at R5. Even if it means you're just going to take them off later, that's fine. It's a bit of a tragedy for you to do that to the Gungans, but at the same time, I realize people have their priorities, and sometimes Bane actually does need his good mods. Now, that being said, Boss Nass really is in the area of protection and speed, and can also use potency if you can spare it, particularly on the cross or maybe in an off potency set. I like the health set because it goes to protection. Next up, we are looking at Phalanx, and Phalanx is also very, very simple. He's just like Boss Nass in the sense that he wants protection, but he's not really like Boss Nass in the sense that he wants speed. I realize I have an atrocious amount of speed on him. You don't necessarily need that. As we already looked at with the Zetas, he is going to be able to taunt without necessarily taking turns, so it's not as important to him. I'm a bit obsessed with Gungans. Thank you, the Phantom Menace in my childhood, but at the same time, you don't need 26, 28, 25 speed mods on him. What you do need to be able to get through this event successfully is you do want protection primaries on his arrow, on his triangle, on the cross, on the circle, and then the overall health sets are really nice too, because that health is later converted into protection. And because we don't have protection sets, we will have to settle for the health sets on him. Next up is going to be Captain Tarpals. Very straightforward attacker. Different from Boss Nass though, his base potency isn't all that high, and we do actually want him to be landing a lot of his debuffs, particularly the shock that he has on his basic that is really valuable, and we'll get into that more later, why that's so pivotal for the entire event and even for afterwards for Gungans. So I would recommend at a bare minimum a potency set on him. If you want to do a potency cross, I would understand it, but I went for pure offense, and I'll be honest, even that was a little bit underwhelming with having only R5 on Tarpals. It still was very hard to kill things. That being said, his arrow, you can go for speed or offense. You see that I kind of cheated here, and I used a 6% offense secondary, or nearly 6% offense secondary, to be able to get the offense I needed out of him. But if you don't have that, which is understandable, just put an offense primary in here with a decent amount of speed, and then the offense set to complement. Again, you don't necessarily need to be able to match these offense numbers because he is R8 right now for the raid, but at the time of the event he was R5. He was using these exact same mods, and he was getting great benefit from it. His triangle can of course be crit damage. There's great benefit there, especially if you can get a good offense secondary. So overall for Tarpals, potency and offense, great speed secondaries, and just a lot of offense primaries or secondaries depending on what the mod is. Next up, last but not least, is going to actually be Boomadir. I do have Boomadir modded for crit damage, and this is different from a lot of people, and I promise you there's a reason, and it all boils down to his unique ability that is actually going to increase his offense throughout the battle by 5% every single time he uses a special ability. How the math works out, and I don't have the Excel spreadsheet in front of me right now, but how it works out is every single time that his offense goes up, his base offense is getting larger and larger, and the crit damage multiplier starts to matter more and more and more. Because of that, we want to end up having crit damage on him, not only through the triangle, but also through the set. Now, if you're saying, Calvin, I was told crit damage sucks for the longest time, I don't have a crit damage set. That's fine. The gains that you actually get from overall damage from having a crit damage set versus offense is actually nominal. It's not all that much. I'm going for optimized here, which is the reason why I have it. But if you don't have that available, throw an offense set on him and you go for a very similar theme for Tarpals, except for here, we can really ignore the potency because the main debuff we care about from Boomadir, he is going to be able to land it every single time because the enemy cannot resist it. Speed is also a really nice factor for him because we want to be able for him to cycle through his specials, because the more he does that, the more offense we are going to be building throughout the battle. So with all that being said, crit damage set, crazy speeds, offense primaries or offense secondaries where you can. I do have a crit chance set on him. I don't know how important the crit chance actually is, even at 100%, purely because Tarpals is going to be handing out advantage, and the team actually has multiple ways of giving vulnerable as well, meaning we have multiple ways to crit without actually needing crit chance. So now that we've covered all the modding that we need for the event, the Zeta Priority, and the Relic Priority. Let's get into it. Now, phase 1 is very, very easy. In fact, if you're watching this right now, I'm guessing that you're either a really great fan, or maybe your hands are just currently wet and you had the video going in the background while you were washing the dishes. Either way, there's really nothing you can screw up about phase 1. The only thing that you have to do is use a little bit of common sense and just make sure that you're trying to work down intentionally the same battle droid at the same time. You have 5 against you, which pretty much means there's no real kill order because they're all the same enemy, and there really isn't that much variance in what you should be doing because you can just spam specials. AoEs are good. Non-AoEs are fine too. Taunting is good. There's no real secret sauce here of any specific type of setup because the B1s are not only the same character across the board, but you can't really stick debuffs on them all that well just because they shake them off constantly, and there aren't any specific buffs that are going to be helping you here as well. So overall, no real turn order, no specific setup, no making sure you don't use this special ability, just kind of making your way through it until you're done. There are a lot of them. I don't know why they thought that this excessive amount of battle droids was necessary. In fact, I'm gonna skip through this just a little bit just so we can get to that precious phase 2 just a little bit quicker. I guess one of the things that should be said is one of the specials you'll be massing is Boss Nass that puts up Retribution, which can be really handy because, you know, they die a lot faster. So, on to phase 2. Before we jump into phase 2, we do need to take a very quick look at Captain Tarpal's kit and the anomaly it is. Because if you've been playing this game for 3, 4, or 5 years, you probably have the general understanding that specials are better than basics. That is going to be wrong with Tarpal's a part of the time, specifically with the special No Giving Up. To understand the context here, you have to remember that Gungans, specifically this ability, was targeted to counter General Grievous. And I don't know if you guys remember from The Phantom Menace, spoiler alert, General Grievous never appears. What I'm getting at is the fact that this is specifically made to inflict mark on the target enemy leader if they are a separatist for 2 turns, which can't be dispelled, evaded, or resisted. This is going to cause problems for you in the event, specifically in phase 2, but also in others, because if you're, let's say you're trying to kill a Droideka or a Stop that are a pretty high priority target in most of the rounds, you throw this at them, you're like, I got marked on them. Then the mark goes away because it only lasted for 1 turn, or because they died. And now you're stuck having to hit the stupid B1 that was put in the leadership position for some reason, despite the fact that they don't really have a leadership ability. So all that being said, the majority of the time, we want to be avoiding this ability right here because it's going to cause you problems, and we want to be focusing on Hey Yusa. His base is actually amazing. Not only does it apply shock, but it also removes buffs, which really helps them from coming back unless they're able to cleanse the shock. His AoE is fine. You don't really have to worry about that. Use it when you feel like it. But just know, basic 9 times out of 10, especially in the event, is going to be better than No Giving Up, which can lock you behind a target that you probably don't even want to be killing in the first place. So without further ado, let's jump into our phase 2. So we are going to be coming in here, same layout like we did in phase 1, except for we now have new enemies, aka Droideka as well as Stop. Again, for the most part, you can kind of mash specials here, but we do need to take note there are a different set of characters we need to be killing first. I personally focus pretty hard on the Stops because, well, they seemed killable. I tried doing this for several times, going after the Droideka, and between the 2 different B1s, I just didn't have enough damage overall to get him down, and the path of least resistance was going after the Stops first, and then after going after Droideka. The Droideka itself doesn't typically do too much damage here, at least in phase 2. That does happen sometimes in some other ones, so you don't have to worry about it killing you too much. The one thing that I will say is if it does ever get its shield generator and damage immunity going up, do make sure to dispel that with either the ability we just talked about with Captain Tarpal's or with Boss Nass's Mass Dispel. The reason being, it kind of sucks to get stuck behind a damage immunity taunt, but even on top of that, he is going to be countering, or rather assisting, more and dealing even more damage and putting your team at greater threat. So now you can see we've already worked down both of the Stops. This seemed, again, to be the path of least resistance here. Using whatever, again, specials we need. No real specific order. There will be specific orders once we get into the later tiers. As they become more difficult, there are certain things that are just going to happen to be able to take the enemy out. So again, took down the first stop, getting very close to taking down the second stop, prioritizing our specials, calling Tarpals in with Bombardier, and then going back and having Tarpals do the same thing to Bombardier, as they are the main sources of damage here. You'll notice that we had our special to dispel Droideka lined up quite well, worked out very well for us. And then as soon as we get stopped down, which I believe is going to happen here very soon, we should be able to move on to our phase 3, where again we will be looking at some more mechanics overall for what is going on in the event, because it actually can be kind of tricky if you don't. So now that Stop is dead, we can kind of go all out on our good friend Droidic here. We land several explosives on him because he did not have protection, and that's what happens when you use that AoE ability from Jar Jar. So now finishing up the phase 2, moving on to the wonderful Droideka phase 3. One of the big challenges of phase 3 is the fact that you're going to be going up against 3 Droidekas at the same time. The Droidekas are incredibly tanky, and that's not just when they have damage immunity on them. So one of the best ways to be able to take them out is by using Jar Jar Binks' basic as much as possible when the enemy team is loaded with debuffs. What is going to happen some of the time, not every single time, we are going to inflict Death Mark for 1 turn to the healthiest enemy, which can't be resisted if they have at least 3 debuffs. The reason why this strategy was the most successful for myself when I was running through this event is because B1, the other characters on the team, can't really hold debuffs, nor are they very healthy because they are stack-based rather than health-based, meaning that if we can land Death Mark on a character, it is going to end up being one of the Droidekas, which will massively facilitate the process because, as I've already said multiple times, it's the title of the video, our 5 damage dealers really aren't all that great at dealing damage, so having something like Death Mark that is going to be dealing 50% of their max health is going to help a lot as far as this event goes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it once again. So this is going to be all about timing things just right with what we just explained with Jar Jar's kit. One of the other things that you might want to keep an eye out for is saving Boss Nass's Mass Dispel for an appropriate time when they all have their damage immunity up. Now, we're coming up on it right about now where it's gonna go really quickly, so I'm gonna have to pause this. So our next turn up is going to be Jar Jar Binks, and as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, I have all abilities available to myself, including Jar Jar specials. We are not going to use the specials. Why, you may ask? Because all 3 enemy Droidekas all currently have 3 debuffs, meaning there's a 33% chance we actually might be able to get Death Mark on one of them and facilitate the process of killing them a lot faster. So we go, and we actually get really lucky. Not only did we get Death Mark, but we got it on the one we were aiming at while we were blind, so all the other Gungans rush in, and well, you can guess what happens next. That Droideka is instantly defeated, not only getting, oh, and it actually happens again. So again, we have another turn where we go ahead and use the basic. Now this time we weren't as lucky, and we were, forced to aim for the damage immune Droideka, so we weren't able to get Death Mark on him, but we got it on the other one, which now allows us to taunt and go after him. Now you see, we won't line everything just perfectly right, which is probably good for the sake of this video. I don't want to have the perfect RNG run in here that nobody can accomplish it. But at the same time, we were able to kind of show the idea here, even despite the fact that he cleansed it immediately. You'll notice that we are still using our basic with Tarpals for pretty important reasons, and we are specifically holding the Mass Dispel from Boss Nass just in case we get stuck behind a bunch of damage immunity again. Again, the only ways to dispel the damage immunity and taunting tanks from our enemy Droidekas is going to be through Tarpal's basic as well as Boss Nass ability. Now, we were able to put Protection Disruption, more on that later, from our good friend Bombardier, and annihilate the other Droideka. Now, again, another Death Mark right about now will be great, but again, those aren't guaranteed, so we'll have to take what we can get. Using our specials when appropriate. Again, we had all specials available to us, yet we specifically chose to use the basic ability with Jar Jar, aiming for Droideka, hoping we would get Death Mark. Not going to happen every single time, but when it does happen, that's how you're going to be able to get through this at the quickest amount of time. So don't worry too much about having to spam the specials from Jar Jar. Look on the enemy team. Are there enough debuffs out there to be able to apply Death Mark? If they are, take the shot. If you get it, this will end up going a lot easier. And then, of course, take the next 5 minutes of your life to whittle down the rest of the B1s. And now, on to phase 4. Now, to pass phase 4 without much frustration, you really only have to understand one crucial thing, and it's going to be found in the journey guide itself, where you can see down here at the bottom it says, getting 3 stacks of strength and shield will prevent the enemy from recovering health for the rest of the encounter. If you do not do this, you will not kill Darth Maul. You have to have all 3 stacks of strength and shields. At that point, Darth Maul will stop recovering a ridiculous amount of health, and you will actually be able to kill him. His overall damage isn't that bad, so the important thing here is being able to get to those 3 stacks. Now, you might be asking, how do I get to those 3 stacks? The way that you get to those 3 stacks is by the shield generator itself taking turns. The shield generator itself really only takes turns by gaining a bonus turn every single time recharge expires. Recharge is one of those blue buffs that sits above the shield generator. And you might be asking now, okay, how do I get rid of the stacks of recharge? And the answer is pretty simple, by spamming specials. It's actually a lot more nuanced than that, but I really don't feel like going through 5 different kits right now to show you that, when I can just tell you spam specials and you will eventually get there. The battle itself might feel like there's more to it than that, but there's really not. It's going to come down to the fact of you getting that specific buff on the enemy team 3 times before anything feels like it's going anywhere. Also, let me just say, it knocked it out of the park, CG. This event was so cool. This was so fun to play live. I get it. Gungans didn't go directly up against Darth Maul, but that's fine. Now, like I said earlier, there isn't really any specific way out of doing what I had told you. Even if you land Deathmark on Darth Maul, you're not going to get very far overall. There might be an argument, if you're really struggling with this specific phase, to actually remod Boomadier and Captain Tarpals for defense, or rather protection, just a lot of protection rather than offensive stats. The reason being, the only thing that can really go wrong here is one of them can die. I'm not sure if that even ever happened to us. Now, you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen right now, the recharge stack just went down to 0, meaning that we just got one of these little shields on the stack over there, meaning that we are 1/3 away from Darth Maul actually being killable. The reason for this is you'll find that he heals way too much. He dispels the shock. I think CG intentionally made it so that he's literally unkillable until we get all 3 of those shields. You will now notice on the left-hand side of the screen where the shield generators, we now have 2 stacks because, again, as we have been spamming our specials, that recharge counter, which is the blue icon on the far left above the shield generator, as that goes down, we are going to get a 3rd stack on the shield generator and ultimately be able to kill Darth Maul. Darth Maul still being unkillable, we now just got the 3rd stack, the strength and shield, meaning that there's really isn't anything Darth Maul can do to prevent himself from dying by this point. We just have to hit him with enough hits. This will still take a while because they give him a ridiculous amount of health. Like he's not hard to kill, it just takes forever. And he does seem to be immune to max health damage as well. There's no cheating this with exposes or death marks or anything fancy like that, so we are just going to have to get through it. He's going to keep doing things, but again, as long as you survive, as long as you get those 3 stacks, you are going to get him down. Just eventually, I'm just going to, fast forward this so we don't have... You're going to have to endure this twice. I've already endured this once, so just get down to the end there, and you'll see we'll knock our good friend Darth Maul right out of there. Victory! And finally, on to everyone's favorite, Phase 5. Now, if this is the first thing that you're watching in this entire video, I can already tell that you're probably pretty frustrated with the event, especially because your Gungans are only at R5. Now, I will tell you, there is a way to beat Phase 5 without having any higher than that. I did it myself, and we're going to show you how. Now, I won't lie, and I can't lie, there is a little bit of RNG involved in this to be able to line things up right. If you have much higher relic levels and you can brute force your way through it, that's great, but I'm going to show you the strategy that I was able to do multiple times with only R5, and it's going to revolve around 2 different specials, one on Boomadier and then the next on our good friend Jar Jar Binks. So first up with Boomadier, it is the Horn of Auto Gunga. This is going to do something critical where it is going to put protection disruption on all Separatist allies, which can't be copied, dispelled, or resisted for 2 turns. The reason why that matters is not only so that you can, kill the enemy team because they don't have protection, but it's because Jar Jar's special, Big Boomas, will apply 3 stacks of exposed for 1 turn if the enemy did not have any protection. So if we apply protection disruption, we don't actually have to worry about manually working down the enemy's protection, and we can just come in with this special right on top of it. Apply 3 exposes, which will be 60% of that stupid Droideca's health and be immediately able to kill it so that we don't have to worry about it. And then really, once the Droideca is dead, well, you'll see, it tends to work out pretty well. So phase 5 is going to start off with some familiar faces, using more Droidecas and stops. It is a two-parter. You really don't have to worry that much about this initial phase. It's just the same annoying stuff that we've been through before. And quite frankly, it's probably a little bit irritating because, you know, you're going to have to do these a few times to be able to get RNG to line up correctly for you. The one nice thing is they do seem to be significantly weaker from some of the other Droidecas as well as stops that we faced in previous phases. The only reason I say that is because I felt like my R5 characters were actually able to tear through them at great effect. Kill orders, pretty much the same as usual. Kill the stops and the Droidecas, then move on to the B1s. One thing I will say here is while you're working through the 500 stacks of B1, towards the end of it, try to make sure that you have all of your specials off of cooldown, because as we mentioned just previously, those actually are going to be pretty important coming into this next phase. So now we have Droideca, Newt, and B1 here, and we immediately open up with Protection Disruption. Now the Droideca has no protection. With Jar Jar, once he gets his turn, we focus on that very specific special of Big Boomas, and we will actually be able to land 3 exposes and make this job significantly easier. So again, Jar Jar's turn's right here. I just paused it, and he's kind of in multiple places at the same time. You will see that he'll come in, he will apply 3 exposes because there's no protection, and now all the rest of the Gungans will charge in, not only doing their own damage, but on top of that, dealing even more, pretty much putting him in a position where we're almost able to kill him immediately. Now, we are going to break the cardinal rule here, and if you recall earlier in the video, I said 9 times out of 10, you don't want to use Captain Tarpal's Mark Special. But Droideca was so close here and had so many debuffs, I just risked it for the biscuit and tried to go for the kill, calling in Boomadir, and it worked. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you make it to this point, you've essentially already won, assuming you have all 5 Gungans and the shield generator. Even though we got stuck with the stupid mark behind Newt, it's not really going to be a problem because we will eventually get past it and be able to go after B1. Again, as we said in the previous Battle vs. Maul, there isn't really a way to cheat this because Newt can't have Death Mark, right? He can have Death Mark, it just doesn't really do anything to him. So we're going to fast forward over this many stacks of B1 to show you where this ends up. And the nice thing is, I will warn you if you're not already aware, once we do kill B1 as well as Newt, we're going to run into another Droideca. You do not have to really worry about that as much because that Droideca will not have another B1 to heal him, and he's actually very killable. You don't have to have any specific setup. But again, the big way to be able to take this one down is by getting Protection Disruption, or I guess just waiting until Droideca no longer has any protection, lining up that special with Jar Jar, landing the 3 exposes, popping them, and then just having enough raw damage between Captain Darbles and Boomadir to make up for the other 40% of damage that you didn't have in the first place. So again, eventually working our way through Newt. He himself really isn't a threat. You will get through him. It just might take a second. And then as soon as you do, you're going to have to deal with the Droideca coming up. And actually, we could actually go ahead and use our good friend Tarpal's marked ability. So Newt is still there. Rather unfortunate. You just have to kill the Droideca now. Again, the Droideca is not that big of a menace, especially because he doesn't have B1 to heal him. You'll notice that we opted to use Tarpal's basic there for the very specific reason of going after or removing the damage immunity from Droideca, and from here we probably pretty much called it a day. Again, just have to work through them. There's nothing really special. Spam your specials, do whatever it takes, just get them down. It'll take a minute, again, especially if you're using R5s, because there's just not as much damage there as there should be. And once we have our good friend Droideca taken down, we'll go right back to Newt, and it's pretty easy. Again, if you can kill Droideca in that very opening, not even the opening slot, but if you can just kill that Droideca with everyone still standing, you'll be just fine. There isn't really all that much to worry about. So fast forwarding here just a little bit, because as you can see, this is going very well. We got Droideca down. We're going to work Newt down. And you yourselves are going to be able to unlock your very own Jar Jar Binks. So congratulations, everyone. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. This is my favorite character in pretty much all of Star Wars lore, but on top of that as well, in the greater universe for Galaxy of Heroes. And we do stay tuned. We will have a video coming here shortly about how to Omicron, mod, and what teams and things you should actually be doing with Jar Jar once you have them unlocked. But until then, thank you guys all for watching. Appreciate you all. Until the next time, stay awesome.